Hey, good afternoon, and welcome everyone to our webinar and listening session today regarding updates to Michigan's Clean Water State Revolving Funds, the scoring criteria. Glad you could be here with today. We have about 55 people logged in right now, and I'm sure a few more will come on as we continue our intros here. My name is Jim Ostrowski, and I work in the Environmental Support Division here at EGLE, and I'm going to be helping moderate this afternoon session. I'll be coming on when we hear from you in just a little bit. Before I turn over to Dan, just want to remind you that for now, the lines are muted and we are recording this webinar like we do with all of them. And we're going to be posting this recording up online on our YouTube channel by the end of the week. So you'll find it up there, and anyone who registered will get a link to this recording when you have it. Also, keep an eye on the chat because they'll be dropping a couple links into the chat for you to check out. All right, we're going to kick this off with just a short presentation from Dan Beauchamp. So Dan, if you want to pop on and share your screen, you can take it over. Looks good.
Okay. Okay, thanks, Jim. So yeah, today like Jim said, this is a listening session for updates to Michigan's Clean Water State Revolving Fund scoring criteria. So before we start, I'm Dan Beauchamp. I am the section manager for the Water Infrastructure Funding and Financing section in EGLE. We administer the SRF program, which includes both the Clean Water or CWSRF program and also the DWSRF program, which there is a separate webinar on that on those scoring criteria or the new scoring criteria for that tomorrow at 1 o'clock. So just a little agenda. So we're going to start off going why we are here. And then I will provide an overview of the existing CWS scoring criteria for wastewater projects, stormwater projects, and non-point source projects. And then finally, from there, we'll open up and have an open forum for suggestions for amending the Clean Water State Revolving Fund scoring criteria, beginning with fiscal year 27 projects. So why we're here. So before we get into this, I just wanted to just touch base on why we are not here. So for those of you that have submitted clean water projects for fiscal year 26, you're aware that draft scores or those projects have been scored by our Water Resource Division of EGLE, and those draft scores have been conveyed to those applicants and their consultants probably last week. So right now we're for fiscal year 26. We're in the process of allowing applicants to review their draft scores and comment on those and whatnot. This webinar is not a forum for discussions about that. There's in that email and draft scores, there's specific things that says who to reach out to. And so hopefully that's clear. If it's not, reach out to the project manager. This webinar is focused on the new scoring criteria that will be in place for fiscal year 27 projects. So let's get into why we're here. The SRF legislation was changed in 2022 to allow for changes to scoring to be made no more than every 3 years. So previous to this legislation change, the score was contained in administrative rule or law, depending on what program you're talking about between clean water or drinking water. That didn't give us EGLE or didn't give EGLE the ability to change that scoring criteria for, new priorities, that sort of stuff, and also priorities for the community. So EGLE's priorities or community's priorities, we were stuck with that criteria. So we're allowed to come up with new criteria no more than every 3 years. So in 2023, new scoring criteria was developed for wastewater and stormwater projects through a public meeting and hearing process and put new in place for SRF loans starting in fiscal year 2024. New scoring criteria was not developed for non-point source projects at that time. This new scoring criteria that was done through this process was again put in place in 24. That criteria has to be used in 24, 25, and 26. So for fiscal year 27 beyond, we can consider new scoring criteria. So EGLE right now is trying to involve stakeholders in this SRF scoring process and trying to give everyone ample time to submit comments and recommendations on potential criteria changes. So we're in the process right now of getting comments and then trying to develop draft criteria. Okay. So Part 53 requires scoring criteria address the following categories. So this is contained in the legislation. So it requires us to follow these five categories. That's compliance, public health, achieving water quality standards, improving infrastructure, and then affordability. So it says that we have to address the following categories. We can come up with additional sub-criteria, if you want to call it, in those categories to address whatever we're trying to score on. The one thing that the law does require is it requires us to award at least 20% of the total allowable points to overburdened and significantly overburdened communities. So we don't have the ability to change that or to lower that threshold based on the affordability category. 20% of the award has to go to a minimum of 20% of the award has to go to overburdened and significantly overburdened communities. So wastewater, stormwater, and non-point source projects, starting in fiscal year 27, will use similar categories, but will have different scoring criteria. They'll also be scored and ranked on separate PPLs. So one thing I just wanted to highlight here, specifically as it relates to stormwater, because did get a couple of comments on stormwater. There is a separate scoring and ranking procedure. Additionally, we have committed to setting aside a minimum of 5% of the fundable range for stormwater projects. I think there's some confusion out there, similar to what we have always done for non-point source projects. So if you have a stormwater project, it's a good time to apply because we haven't had many stormwater projects, and we're really looking forward to funding stormwater projects. Next, we're going to get into the existing wastewater and stormwater scoring criteria. So you can see this table here. I kind of separated them by category. So I'm going to be jumping between wastewater and stormwater a little bit, but I just wanted to be clear on the category and how we score those. So for the first category of compliance, for wastewater projects, if the project is a direct result from an enforceable schedule, so that enforceable schedule is from an NPDES permit or an administrative consent order or a consent judgment. If those projects are a requirement of those enforceable schedules, 15 points are currently being awarded. On the stormwater side, if the project is a result of a violation notice for MS4s, those are awarded 5 points. Under the improving infrastructure category, if the project is a result of an asset management program, or is identified in the asset management program from, like, say, a capital improvement plan, that sort of stuff, 20 points is awarded. Additionally, on the wastewater side, if the project is a result of regionalization, or if the project proposes to do regionalization as part of the SRF loan, then 20 points will be awarded. And finally, on the wastewater side, if the project is aimed at resiliency. So one thing I just want to highlight here when we're talking about resiliency, this isn't like an extra pump to meet firm capacity as a requirement of, say, 10 state standards. This is going above and beyond to address resiliency. So if that project does go above and beyond, then 20 points can be awarded for that. So you can see here that, and I'll get into this a little bit later, but each of these bullet points, 20 points can be awarded. Each of these categories does have a maximum number of points that a project can score. So I'll get into that, what the maximum points are a little bit later, but I just wanted to highlight that right now. Similar on the stormwater side, if the project is a result of an asset management program, 20 points are awarded. And then if there's regionalization efforts in the stormwater project, then 20 points is also awarded. And finally on this slide, the affordability or disadvantaged category. So again, I talked about this previously, but the legislation requires us to award a minimum of 20% of the total award to overburdened and significantly overburdened communities. So under the existing scoring criteria, we award 20 points to overburdened systems, and 25 points to significantly overburdened systems. So that's similar to on the wastewater side or the stormwater side. So next in the public health category, there's a lot on the slide, but for the wastewater, if the project is aimed at sanitary sewer overflow or wastewater treatment plant bypassing, if the project is aimed at reducing or eliminating those SSO discharges or wastewater treatment plant bypasses, you can be awarded points there. So currently, if the project proposes to eliminate like wet weather SSOs, 20 points can be awarded for projects that have demonstrated that they don't meet EGLE's SSO policy, specifically the remedial design standard that's contained in the SSO policy. So if the community is having wet weather discharges at less than that remedial design standard, that project is proposing to add additional storage or doing I&I removal, then 20 points can be awarded there. Additionally, operationally related SSOs. So for 20 points can be awarded for projects that are going to address dry weather SSOs due to structural concerns that cause chronic operational issues. Additionally, in the public health category on the wastewater, there's points awarded for CSO reduction or elimination. So 20 points can be awarded for a project aimed at reducing the annual untreated, uncontrolled CSO volume for anything greater than 10 million gallons a year, then 20 points would be awarded. Additionally, if that annual reduction of uncontrolled, untreated CSO volume was between the 5 and 10 million gallons on an annual average, then 15 points would be awarded. And then if that reduction was less than 5 million gallons, then 10 points would be awarded. Then the final criteria on the wastewater side for public health is biosolids scoring for PFOS. So if the project is to address the biosolids concentrations of the interim biosolids strategy, then 20 points would be awarded. Now we'll go to the stormwater side. 5 points in the public health category can be awarded to projects that result in the following. So if the project reduces stormwater runoff volume and increases water quality treatment and also addresses flooding issues causing water quality problems or provides system resiliency, then 5 points are awarded. The next category under the existing wastewater and stormwater scoring criteria is water quality. So under the wastewater or clean water, WRD is the one who currently scores these projects. They calculate out water quality severity points for parameters such as dissolved oxygen, nutrients, toxics, and microorganisms. So if your project is aimed at, improving dissolved oxygen in the receiving water, addressing nutrients, toxics, or microorganisms, then potentially water quality severity points are awarded to those projects. On the stormwater side, the water quality category is really where you'll find a large chunk of the potential points. So there's a maximum of 45 points awarded in this category for stormwater projects. That those break down kind of as follows. 10 points are currently awarded for projects that make progress towards achieving total maximum daily load, pollutant load reductions in an MS4 permit. 10 points for that. Additionally, if the project is reducing stormwater runoff volume, then up to 20 points can be awarded. So currently, what WRD looks at here is looks at what BMPs you're proposing as part of the project, and then also the size of those BMPs, and it has like a sliding scale for points to be awarded depending on that BMP and the size of that. And then third, if the project results in increased water quality treatment of an existing discharge, 10 points are awarded. Next, if the project results in disconnection of existing impervious surfaces, then 10 points are awarded. And then finally, if the project results in a regional BMP to address local site issues such as, clay soils where they can't infiltrate, then or to comply with the MS4 post-construction requirements, 10 points are awarded. So here's a chart that lists the maximum number of points that can be awarded in each of these categories. So for compliance category, the existing scoring criteria has a maximum number of 15 on the wastewater and 5 on the stormwater. For public health, it's 20 on the wastewater side and 5 on the stormwater side. Under the water quality, it's 20 under the wastewater, 45 under the stormwater, and improving infrastructure, 20 in both. And then the affordability or overburdened systems or significantly overburdened systems, the maximum in that category is 50. So the total point possible for both wastewater and stormwater are currently 100 points. So next, we'll talk about the existing non-point source scoring criteria. So one of the previous slides I kind of talked about that this was not updated in 2023 when the stormwater and wastewater scoring criteria was developed. So that's why you'll see some of these point totals different. It is our intent for fiscal year 27 now to update the non-point source scoring criteria too. So currently how these non-point source projects are scored, there is some additional criteria here that doesn't necessarily apply. I only included the ones where the projects could be scored upon. So the first category, if the project is implementing an action from a dissolved oxygen total maximum daily load, then 100 points are awarded. Next, if the project addresses violations of water quality standards in the watershed or project area, a maximum of 400 points is awarded. That they look at the individual parameters and then give points based on what parameters exceeding water quality standards and how the project will address that. Next, if the watershed contains high quality waters which must be maintained, then 20 or 200 points is awarded. If the watershed has a high public use value, then 200 points is awarded. If there's high landowner or municipal willingness to participate in controlling non-point sources in the watershed or project area, then 200 points is awarded. And then finally, if ongoing local, federal, or state non-point source initiatives in the project, if in the project area or watershed, 100 points is awarded. So you can see here out of these criteria that I listed, a maximum of 1,200 points is allowed under non-point source. So I think that kind of goes through the existing scoring criteria. Now I'll turn it over to Jim to start taking comments.
Yeah, thanks, Dan, for the presentation. So what we're going to do now, good guys, screen up there explains how it's going to work. So basically, we're here to listen to your comments and things like that. Also, if you have questions, feel free to let us know. A couple different ways you can do that. You can type it in the Q&A box, and I know we have a couple of questions already in there on the Q&A box in your Zoom toolbar. Also, if you want to verbalize your question, go ahead and click the raise hand icon on your Zoom toolbar. I'll call on your name and we'll unmute you so you can ask your question that way or make your comment as well that way. Also, written comments, as you see here on the screen, can be submitted through September via email. So if you're not sure your comment right now, but want to send it later, jot this email down. I'll also ask Natalie, who's on with us, to please drop that email address into the chat so you have it. Yeah, okay. So let me take a look at the Q&A box. We do have a couple questions. One person, I think a couple people actually asked if they get a copy of this presentation. And yeah, Dan, if you can get that over to me,
I will.
I can send it out in an email or we can post it on the website along with recording maybe. But one way or another, we'll make sure you guys have that. All right, going down my list here. Next, I guess there's a question that came in. What's the basis for awarding only 5 points for the public health benefits of stormwater projects? Reducing stormwater volume also achieves SSO reduction, etc. So sanitary sewer overflow, SSO reductions.
So I guess the public health. So when we were going through the draft criteria, or sorry, when we were developing the scoring criteria in fiscal year 2023, originally the draft criteria that we developed as part of that didn't have we originally proposed 0 points in the public health category. So we went through a similar process like this back in 2023, where we got public input and that sort of stuff. As a result of that public input, we decided to, include the criteria that I just talked about for public health, the 5 points. So that was developed as part of the stakeholder involvement that happened back in 2023. I will say that, that's why we're having these discussions now. Should that number be, higher? I think that's all to be talked about. So that's where we would really like, stakeholder involvement, stakeholder suggestions in how to further refine the scoring criteria. Because now we've had at least a few years of this criteria in place. Unfortunately, we have not had a high number of stormwater projects that have been scored because there haven't been a lot of stormwater projects that have submitted for SRF funding. But we've had a few. So yes, we welcome any comments on that. So
All right, thanks. There's a comment that came in, just person saying it would be good if SRF could consider NOVs, notice of violations, or compliance communications from WRD, which is our Water Resource Division, to the applicant to get some sort of enforcement points rather than having things escalate to ACO, Administrative Consent Order, schedule of compliance or judgment. Sorry, translating some of the acronyms for people that might not know.
I appreciate that, Jim. Yeah,
Okay.
thanks for the comment.
Yeah. For Clean Water State Revolving Fund, how can stormwater projects be funded without a direct repayment source? Meaning my community doesn't have a stormwater user fee.
That is one of the challenges, yes, without a stormwater utility legislation. Yes, I get that. And I don't have a complete answer. I mean, there's general fund and there's issues there to being able to pay back those projects.
Yeah. I got a hand raised here. Go to Kelly. Kelly, you should be able to unmute your line and make your comment, question.
Thanks for this presentation. This is great. Just a couple questions. Back when the legislation was updated, the term stormwater treatment was updated to say stormwater management. And that was intentional in order to allow projects that weren't just like green infrastructure, but to start to consider conveyance and flooding types of projects. I do see, I think the scoring criteria part of that legislation didn't directly get updated to reflect that. But I'm wondering how we move in a direction where we're not just thinking the smaller scale storms, but thinking more large scale conveyance and flooding, because there is such a need. When we had our last water infrastructure task force in our Southeast Michigan region, the #1 priority was to address flooding, and that continues to be a significant priority.
I completely understand where you're coming from. I think so. One of the things on SRF, right, there has to be a water quality benefit. And I think you can make that case in a lot of situations as it relates to flooding. I'm just saying, I'm just pointing that out in that just further maybe help in developing project planning documents and that sort of stuff. We have had some, since that legislation changed, we've had some projects, some stormwater projects as a result of conveyance, not necessarily what you're talking about, Kelly, on getting to the point of, upsizing those conveyance conduits or conveyance sewers to address flooding, but more in the lines of rehabbing, doing lining, for example, of storm sewers, which we all know that that there's a lot of need out there as it relates to both wastewater and stormwater. So,
All right, thanks. Thanks for
Yeah.
your comment, Kelly. All right, this person's asking, they're saying, sorry if I missed it, but did you talk about a set aside for small systems? Suggests there be a set aside for smaller communities or smaller projects.
okay, thank you for the suggestion. We'll take that into consideration.
All right. When do you plan to stop taking feedback? I know you said September, but
I'll get
is
into
that
that after our
okay.
comments. I'll answer
Okay,
that.
good. All right, good. We'll save that for later then. All right, for stormwater SRF funding, does the municipality have to have a stormwater utility for the basis of repaying the loans?
They need to have a way to pay back the loan. So not necessarily a utility, but need to have a way to pay back the loan. So that does create some issues.
Okay. All right. What have you adjusted to the scoring with dismantling by Trump and budget costs that will have significant effect on all the criteria? States need to step up and maintain even present quality safety in future ones. Don't you think a relook at the points with less federal input and more on states? So I guess this person's talking a little bit less emphasis on federal and more on state. Any thoughts on that, Dan?
Can you repeat that? What was the question?
Yeah, well, it's kind of reading it as it came in. What have you adjusted to the scoring with basically the Trump administration and the budget costs that will have significant effect on the criteria?
So we currently have not made any changes to scoring criteria because that scoring criteria, the way that legislation was written, we don't have the ability to make changes any more frequently than every 3 years. So again, that went into effect for fiscal year 24 projects. So 24 projects, fiscal year 25, which most of those are to the point right now of getting close to signing, and then fiscal year 26 projects, which have just on the clean water side, just submitted project planning documents May 1st. So those 3 years, this existing criteria was in effect. So now we're in the process of obviously updating the scoring criteria for future fiscal years. So I guess we haven't updated anything, and I guess the cuts, till a budget's passed, we really don't know.
Yeah. Through this effort, will the significantly overburden determination methodology be reviewed and changed? Or
So
is
yes.
the focus only on the scoring criteria?
No, that legislation that again happened in 2022 allows us to change the scoring criteria and the significantly overburdened definition. So that we're in a stakeholder involvement process for that too. We had someone else from my team did a presentation maybe a month or so ago on the overburdened and significantly overburdened criteria. And the hope is, I think, sometime in July, the end of July, August, to have some draft overburden determination language or criteria developed. There's a separate website created for that. If you go to our SRF page, you can find it. And we're taking comments on that too. So please review that.
Yeah, and I'll ask Natalie or someone else that's here from the team if they could drop that in the chat so you have it, the overburden criteria scoring stuff. Oh, and by the way, I should mention, I didn't mention this, but we have a couple other team members listening in here and participating. And maybe if Chelsea and Sarah could come on really quick with Dan and just introduce yourself while I'm waiting for more questions and comments.
Hi, I'm Chelsea Walsh. My name's Chelsea Walsh. I'm in the Warren District Office. I'm a project manager with WIFS.
Hi, I'm Sarah Brown. I'm in the Grand Rapids District Office.
Okay, thanks, Chelsea and Sarah. Okay, this person here has got a comment. One thing to consider is that many municipalities do not have a dedicated revenue stream, meaning user fees, that has held back many from applying.
I'm assuming there's talking about stormwater there too. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I'm just logging these in here. All right. Okay, we should have probably defined this earlier. Sorry about that. What is WIFs? And you did say WIFs before.
Yes.
And I think that's a total inside baseball term. So please explain what that is, Dan.
Yes, it's the Water Infrastructure Funding and Financing section. So we're our section is part of the finance division of EGLE.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. So that is just a section within our department, a working section. We refer to it as WIFs. All right. What are ways to quote unquote pay back the loan? Could it be a portion of my general stormwater budget to pay this back?
I believe so. I guess whoever has that question, let's talk offline on that. I am not a funding expert on that sort of stuff, so
yeah,
I don't want to say the wrong thing.
Yeah, that's something probably best to address outside of here. All right. Does anybody have a question they want to raise their hand for? I'm just checking for raised hands. If you have a question, you can raise your hand and I'm continue to go back and forth. Okay, Irma. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to this question about federal funding. I noticed looking at SRF projects, let's say last year, I want to say there were 200 applicants and about 30 or so projects that were funded. I'm not sure if that was clean water or drinking water, or but it was one of those, right? And which means there are a lot of people a lot of utilities that are not able to get funding through this program. And we have a greater need than what there are funds available. If there are cuts, and we do expect there will be some cuts in SRF coming from the federal government, is the state thinking about, in terms of finance, are there going to be additional funds for the state put in, or that the state can use to help fund projects? And I also wonder, with all those that are not being funded because there just isn't enough money, is there a plan? What do
So,
they, yeah.
okay, so to answer your first question, right? So EPA gives us what's commonly referred to as a capitalization grant to for the SRF programs for both clean water and then also drinking water. We also have the revolving nature of the program, right? So all the payback of the loans coming back into the program. So while we are concerned about any cuts from the federal government, we still will have money in our program. So we're always looking at that and running different modeling and that sort of stuff to look at, our fundable range for a given year and how that will ultimately impact the long-term viability of the program. So we're always looking at that sort of stuff. At this point, there is, the president obviously released a budget, but what ultimately gets passed is we're not sure yet, right? So I think it's too premature to talk about, what we're going to do for the next fiscal year or anything like that as it relates to what cuts are going to be seen. So to answer your second question, you are 100% correct in that the amount of applicants that have come into or requested to come into our program in the last few years has far exceeded our funding capability, right? So there are different avenues there. There's depending on the size of the community, if they're less than, say, 10,000, they can also submit for RD or rural development funding. There is the option to carry the project over to the next fiscal year, and we're seeing that on a lot of projects. So, the last few years, especially because Michigan decided to allot a lot of their American Rescue Plan dollars through the SRF program, there was a lot of need that a lot of projects submitted. So I even for fiscal year 26, the number of projects that have submitted project planning documents or have carried over from a previous year is going to far exceed our capability. So this is only one piece of the whole funding aspect. I don't think the SRF program was ever intended to be the last the only kind of thing to fund infrastructure projects. So yeah. I don't know if that answered your question or not, but hopefully it did.
Yes, thank you.
All right, thanks, Irma. Okay, this person has a comment here. It says, with the current aging infrastructure, the scoring really appears to assist with utilities that are having issues or need to expand existing infrastructure. We like to see more points provided towards existing infrastructure improvements to ensure long-term water quality protection.
Thank you for that. We will consider it.
Okay. All right, I don't have any more comments or questions in my queue, so I'm going to give it another minute here. Okay, this person is asking about, this topic is very important. Water is important to life. And who or where can I write to put this at the top of funding? So if somebody wanted to be more active and promote this as being a higher priority, who would they write to, I guess? I don't know.
I guess as it relates to just funding in general.
Yes, providing more funding towards this type of activity.
I would say probably whoever your legislature is. Yeah. Federal. Yeah.
Yep, that is more of a legislative question. Send to your local or federal, probably your U.S. congressperson.
Yep.
All right, well, Dan, I think we do have what we've got. So I'm going to let you go ahead and take it to your next slides there. Go ahead.
Okay. Thanks, Jim. Okay, now I just wanted to highlight the remaining timeline here for SRF scoring criteria update. So I think someone put in the chat our scoring criteria development page. So this information will be contained, this timeline that I'll go over here in a second is on that website. Additionally, anything else related to this, such as the recordings of these, both the clean water and the drinking water, once they're posted, we will link that to on that page. And then additionally, there is on the top of that page, there is a way to just click a button and it automatically generates an email that with the correct email address and the subject line. So if you have any suggestions, you can just click that and then just type in your suggestions and that send it to us. So the remaining timeline for this SRF scoring criteria updates, we're going to take any comments, suggestions that were received as part of this, and then any that are received as we go along, we're going to consider those and hopefully have a draft release of proposed SRF scoring criteria posted to our website sometime probably by the end of August. And we'll continue to accept public comment during that period of time and then after. So again, we're going to have different scoring criteria for stormwater, wastewater, and non-point source. Then from there in September, we will host a public hearing regarding the draft criteria, followed by an additional period of receiving public comments. And then sometime, depending on when that public hearing is, which has not been scheduled yet, again, that on that website that was sent in the chat earlier, once we develop or once we set dates for all this stuff, it'll be included there. We'll also send out a Gov delivery message on the public hearing. So if you're not subscribed to our Gov delivery, please do. And then from there, we will, after we have the public hearing, we'll allow another period of public comment. And then sometime in October, finalize the SRF scoring criteria for stormwater, wastewater, and non-point source and post that on our website. The intent is to have that final scoring criteria done before 2027 SRF intent to apply deadline. So that is November 1st. So we want to have the new scoring criteria in place prior to that ITA deadline. So communities and consultants can know what this projects are going to get scored on and can make informed decisions on how they want to proceed with developing a project planning document for fiscal year 2027, and we can have those conversations at those intent to apply meetings that will occur after that deadline of November 1st. So with that, again, the public comment period is open for this. Please, if you have any comments, suggestions, submit them to our WIF's our email address here, and just make sure you include in your email in the subject line that it's scoring criteria comment, so we can ensure that gets directed to myself and the team that's working on this, so we can consider all the comments from the public. So with that, that's all I have. So Jim.
Okay, great. Thanks, Dan. I did you got some stuff in the chat there, some links to some web pages. I hope you guys saw that. Also, there is a link if you want to sign up to get updates from this program. You can click on that link, and what they do is, like Dan mentioned, send out an email to you. You'll be on our list. All right. Well, with that, just want to remind everybody that we will have recorded this and we'll be posting it up online the next couple of days. We'll be sending an email out to everyone who registered. with link to that recording, as well as some of the resources that we shared today. We are hosting another webinar tomorrow afternoon, related just like this, but related to the Drinking Water Revolving Fund. So many of you will probably will see you then for that one. Thanks for joining us today and providing your valuable comments and input, and also for your questions. Thank you very much. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.